Whispers of a vanished train. The forest was quiet that night. Too quiet. The moon hung low, pale as a faded coin, casting silver threads across the skeletal branches. Somewhere far off, the faint rumble of steel wheels echoed, a sound that seemed both real and imagined, as if the earth itself remembered something it could not forget. For decades, the people of Lower Silesia had whispered about it. A train that vanished in the final days of the Second World War, carrying with it gold, jewels, priceless art treasures stolen from across Europe by a desperate regime. Some swore they had seen its headlamp in the mist. Others claimed to have heard its whistle, long after the tracks were abandoned. It was said the train had been last sighted heading into the Owl Mountains, beneath which an immense network of tunnels known as Project Reswa was being carved into the rock by forced laborers. No one knew where those tunnels truly ended, or what secrets they still held. The official records were silent. The surviving witnesses had grown old, their memories blurred, their voices tinged with the fear of telling too much. Yet the legend endured, passed from one fireside to the next, growing richer with each telling. And now, on this cold evening, the legend stirred once more. A small group of treasure hunters, flashlights trembling in the dark, had gathered at the edge of the forest. They were chasing more than gold. They were chasing a story. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the folds of earth and time, the truth waited. In the spring of 1945, the world was unraveling. Nazi Germany, once a machine of precision and cruelty, was collapsing under the relentless advance of Allied forces. The streets of Berlin were scarred by shell fire. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and defeat. Every day brought new losses, and every night, the sound of distant artillery drew closer. Deep within the ornate halls of the Reich's ministries, a desperate plan took shape. Gold bars stacked like bricks, crates of looted art wrapped in oilcloth, chests filled with rare coins, diamonds, and ancient relics, treasures plundered from museums, banks, and private collections across occupied Europe were to be moved to safety, somewhere remote, somewhere unreachable. Rumors swirled among officers and railway workers. A heavily guarded train, its wagons sealed, would depart under the cover of night. Its route was a closely held secret. The men who loaded it worked in silence, watched by soldiers with eyes like gun barrels. Every crate was numbered, recorded, and locked away in reinforced freight cars. The destination, officially, none existed. But whispers told of an underground fortress in the Owl Mountains' vast tunnels carved into the granite. Hidden from bombs and spies alike, train, some believed, would vanish into those tunnels until the war was won, or until it could be retrieved by those who knew where to look. On a damp April evening, the engine hissed to life. Steam rose like ghostly fingers in the cold air. Conductor, pale and tense, gave a single nod. The train began to move, its wheels clattering over the rails, carrying with it not just gold and silver, but the last flickering hope of a dying empire. Somewhere in the darkness, a few witnesses stood in silence, watching the headlamp fade into the black. They could not have known it would never be seen again. The rain began just after midnight, a cold, steady curtain that blurred the shapes of trees and hills. The gold train pushed forward through the darkness, its wheels clattering against wet steel, each turn of the axles echoing into the lonely valleys of Lower Silesia. A few scattered witnesses, farmers, night workers, and a lone station attendant claimed to have seen it pass. Some described a long chain of freight cars, windows covered, guarded by soldiers who scanned the shadows. Others swore they saw a second engine trailing behind, as if the train were pulling more than it could handle. At the last confirmed sighting, near a small rural station, the locomotive stopped briefly. A soldier stepped onto the platform, glanced at the empty surroundings, and signaled the train to move on. Moments later, it vanished into the night, heading toward the dense forest and the jagged slopes of the Owl Mountains. What happened next remains one of history's most stubborn mysteries. No one saw the train emerge from the forest. No reports of arrival were ever filed. The following morning, Allied scouts advancing into the region found the tracks eerily silent. There were no fresh wheel marks, no abandoned wagons, no sign of an accident. It was as though the train had simply been swallowed by the earth. Years later, some locals would whisper that they had heard muffled sounds beneath the mountains, like distant machinery turning. Others spoke of sealed tunnels, blocked with concrete, guarded by those who did not want the past to be disturbed, when on that night all that remained was the rain, the mist, and the empty rails, gleaming faintly under the moonlight. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the landscape of Lower Silesia was a shattered mosaic of ruins, craters, and abandoned military sites. The Soviet Red Army swept through the region first, moving with cold efficiency. Officially, their mission was to secure transport lines and disarm any remaining German forces. Unofficially, there was something else on their mind. Rumors of a missing train, laden with unimaginable wealth. Locals told Soviet officers about the night the train passed through, about its strange cargo and the heavily armed guards. Some spoke of distant rumblings in the mountains, others of newly sealed tunnels in the hillsides. Intrigued, the Soviets began their own quiet investigation. Teams of engineers and soldiers scoured the forested slopes of the Owl Mountains, mapping every tunnel entrance they could find. Many were collapsed, others were blocked by thick concrete walls, still bearing fresh German markings. At the same time, the new Polish authorities launched their own searches, though they worked in the shadow of the Soviet occupation. Polish railway workers whispered of documents seized by the Soviets' maps. Train schedules coded orders, all of which vanished into Moscow's archives. The Poles suspected that if the train had been found, its treasure was already on its way east. Despite days of digging and weeks of patrols, no public discovery was ever made. Official reports were vague, often describing abandoned rail infrastructure or construction debris rather than treasure. But among soldiers and civilians alike, the legend of the gold train was already taking root. And with each retelling, it grew more elaborate, till the line between fact and myth began to blur. By the early 1950s, the story of the gold train had traveled far beyond the quiet valleys of Lower Silesia. What had once been a local mystery was now whispered about in the back rooms of Warsaw, in smoky Berlin bars, and even across the Iron Curtain. The Cold War climate, thick with suspicion and secrecy, was fertile ground for the legend to grow. In the border towns near the Owl Mountains, strange figures began to appear, men who asked too many questions, carrying accents from far-off lands. Some claimed to be historians, others journalists, but locals were certain they were spies. A few were seen slipping into the forests at night, armed with shovels and lanterns. Not all returned. Rumors swirled about treasure hunters from the west, willing to risk imprisonment to uncover Nazi gold. Soviet authorities kept a tight watch on the area, yet even their patrols couldn't stop the occasional clandestine dig. Each unmarked grave in the forest, each collapsed tunnel fed the paranoia. The legend also entered popular culture. Smuggled books and underground pamphlets told dramatized accounts of the train's final journey, claiming it carried not only gold, but priceless art, stolen jewels, and even experimental weapons. Some versions hinted at supernatural elements, curses placed on the treasure, or guardians still lurking in the mountains. By the end of the 1960s, the gold train was more than a mystery yet. It was a Cold War myth, tangled in espionage, greed, and fear. And for those living in the shadow of the Owl Mountains, it was a reminder that the past was never truly buried. For decades, the gold train legend lingered in whispers and rumors. But in 2015, it exploded into international headlines. To treasure hunters one Polish, one German claimed they had found its exact location. Hidden beneath a hillside near the town of Walberzeth, he said ground-penetrating radar had revealed the unmistakable outline of a train. It's buried deep within an old railway embankment. The announcement sent shockwaves across the globe. Journalists, adventurers, and curious onlookers flocked to the area, turning the quiet Polish countryside into a media circus. Hotels filled with reporters and local restaurants bustled with animated conversations about Nazi gold, missing art, and wartime secrets. Local authorities faced a dilemma. If the claim was real, the site could contain dangerous wartime explosives or even toxic chemicals. The Polish military cordoned off the area and began a careful, methodical investigation. Days stretched into weeks, and the excitement began to fade. Officials eventually announced that no train had been found, at least, not yet. Skeptics called it a publicity stunt, but others believed the authorities were hiding something. The treasure hunters maintained their conviction, suggesting that bureaucratic caution and political interests were delaying the inevitable discovery. One thing was certain: The legend had been reborn for the 21st century. The gold train was no longer just an old war story, it was a living mystery, waiting for someone bold enough or foolish enough to uncover the truth. Even after the official search in Walberseye was declared inconclusive, the Owl Mountains did not return to complete silence. Under the cover of night, small groups continued to arrive, men and women with metal detectors, ground scanners, and spools of climbing rope. They spoke little, kept their flashlights dim, and disappeared into the dense pine forests without leaving a trace. Local villagers whispered about seeing unmarked vans parked along old mining roads, or hearing the faint clink of shovels far past midnight. Some claimed these modern treasure hunters were not amateurs at all, but professionals funded by wealthy collectors or shadowy organizations with their own reasons for finding the gold train. Equally unsettling were the stories of the watchers. Travelers reported glimpsing solitary figures standing at the tree line, unmoving, observing anyone who came too close to certain abandoned tunnels. Some said these were government agents ensuring no one disturbed the site. Others believed they were rival hunters, guarding their own discoveries. Though no one has yet produced undeniable proof, the atmosphere in the mountains remains tense. It is as if the land itself holds its breath, waiting for the day when someone will finally break through stone and soil, reveal what has been hidden for over 70 years. Today, the story of the gold train lives on, not just in the minds of historians or treasure hunters, but in the cultural fabric of Poland and beyond. It is told in quiet conversations over coffee, in dimly lit taverns, and in the pages of countless books and documentaries. For the people of Lower Silesia, the legend has become part of their identity. The mountains, with their deep forests and winding tunnels, are more than just scenery. They are keepers of secrets. Visitors often remark on the strange stillness of the area, as if the land itself is guarding the past. Children grow up hearing about the train that vanished, imagining gold bars stacked to the ceiling, priceless artworks wrapped in canvas, and crates filled with unknown treasures. For some, it sparks dreams of adventure. For others, it is a reminder of the darker chapters of history. And yet, despite all the searches, all the technology, and all the theories, the truth remains buried. Perhaps the gold train is real, lying somewhere deep beneath the mountains? Or perhaps it exists only in the realm of myth, sustained by hope, greed, and imagination. As night falls over the Owl Mountains, the wind rustles through the pines, carrying with it an unspoken question, one that has lingered for decades. Will the gold train ever be found? The answer for now remains hidden in the shadows,